Hello, good morning, and welcome to today's conversation on advancing women's land rights in Kenya. This conversation is brought to you courtesy of FIDA Kenya in partnership with Oxfam's Pan-Africa program. This is definitely a timely conversation as the world celebrates the International Women's Day under the theme, Choose to Challenge. But what is it for us to challenge if women are not seated on the table to be able to discuss, decide matters land and property ownership? With me today is an incredible panel to be able to discuss the challenges, progress made, successes, and how best to advance women's land rights. Hello, good morning. Rights to own, access, control land and land-based resources. And so today we have an incredible panel to help us unpack the challenges, successes, and reflect on a way forward of what we must do to ensure equal access of land and land-based resources for women and men. Besides the panel discussion, FIDA Kenya will be launching a report that looks at the status of women's land rights in Kenya. The report reflects on the progress that Kenya has made as far as African Union commitments on land for women and also the international commitments. Specifically, the report will be looking at African Union's commitment, that's the guiding principles on large-scale land-based investments. It's also going to be looking at the framework and guidelines on land policy in Africa, and then the Maputo Protocol. These are the three African Union commitments that our heads of states and governments in the continent have signed to. And so the report will be looking at how far are we as far as realizing these commitments. Besides the three continental reports, the report further highlights some of the progress made as far as living to the commitments of the voluntary guidelines. So to start us off is a panel. And before we start off, we have the Deputy Executive Director of FIDA Kenya, who is the lead panelist for today's discussion. The Executive Director is Wanjiru Kamanda. Wanjiru will be welcoming us to today's conversation. Please follow us on Twitter handle, that's at FIDA Kenya, at YouTube at FIDA Kenya. Feel free to share your questions, your comments, your concerns, and we'll be addressing them as we go by. Karibu sana, Wanjiru.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear partners, thank you for joining us this morning as we have this very important discussion regarding ownership of and use of land in our country, regarding the gender issue in terms of ownership and possession. This morning, we are very grateful to Oxfam Pan-African Program, who've supported FIDA Kenya to implement a project focusing on women land rights across various counties in this country, and also in the development of the shadow report on the women land rights that we shall be launching this morning. We are also grateful to the lead partner, Ms. Julio Jambo, who worked very closely with our Secretariat and the FIDA Kenya team in the development of the report. I'll give a brief on FIDA Kenya's work regarding women land rights. So since our inception in 1985, FIDA Kenya has done a lot of work regarding the promotion and protection of women land rights in the country. First, we've worked on the development and advocacy for development of legislation and policy that advances the rights of women in terms of land and property ownership, including the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and the Matrimonial Property Act. We've also done a lot of awareness creation across the country, working with communities, working with county governments regarding women's right to own property. We've also done a lot of advocacy work through strategic impact litigation. FIDA Kenya has been at the forefront in advancing jurisprudence on women land rights in the country. For example, we were part of a case which is famously known as the Kericho Six Sisters, where the court made a groundbreaking decision regarding women's right to inherit property. Our work also involves a lot of research and documentation, which advises our interventions. And that advised FIDA's work regarding the preparation, development, and launch of the report on the shadow report on women land rights. Despite our interventions, there remains challenges regarding women's use and access to land. Some of these challenges at times arise from repugnant culture, misconceptions, and myths regarding women's ability or right to access land. And this is well demonstrated by a number of 211 widow and wife eviction cases that have been reported to FIDA Kenya through our toll-free number from April of 2020. At the heart of these disputes is the issue of land. The lack of appreciation and respect that women, whether married or not, whether widowed or with a husband, actually have the right to own, to inherit, to access and utilize land freely. FIDA Kenya continues to work with various partners and through various means to advance the rights of women. We conduct mediation sessions, especially amongst families where there's a dispute regarding land. We also work very closely with alternative justice systems, including elders and chiefs, to advance the rights of women regarding ownership of land. Where our alternative dispute resolution mechanisms are not, do not bear positive fruits, we then take up litigation where we represent women at no cost and ensure that they get justice regarding land ownership. So thank you so much for joining us. Kindly remain with us for the duration of our session today, and as we launch the Women Land Rights Report, and kindly feel free to interact with us, to share your comments, and to also submit your questions for our panel. Thank you.
Asante sana, Wanjiru, for those opening remarks. We feel welcomed and ready for today's conversation. Now we move to the panel discussion, and I would now introduce to you our panelists. I would start with Elizabeth Gishowi. Elizabeth Gishowi is a program officer at FIDA Kenya. She is in charge of women and governance at FIDA Kenya and has vast experience in advocacy and programming around women's land rights. Elizabeth would be speaking to us about some of the work that FIDA Kenya has done as far as advancing women's tenure security. And if you allow me, Elizabeth, I would start with you now. Your Deputy Executive Director did mention, indeed, the incredible work that FIDA has continued to do as far as securing women's land and property rights in the country, from the Kericho case to the test case that FIDA did file around the Matrimony and Property Act. But why should we sit here and discuss about women's land rights? Why is it important, especially within this country?
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Well, it is important that we discuss women land rights, because when you're not at the table, as they say, you will be in the menu. So women must be involved in conversations that border on women land rights. We all know that land is a key economic driver. Therefore, women cannot afford to sit on the sidelines. Number two, we know very well that women, for the longest time, have been passengers in this bus called economic development. Time has come for women to be drivers of this bus. Further afield, if you look at land is a source of security. When a woman has land, it is a source of security at the home level. She has a roof over her head, and she can bring her children up in peace. And thirdly, if a woman has possession to land, we very well know that women, for the longest time in this country, were unbanked. That acts as a source of collateral. In terms of poverty reduction, when women own land, they will be able not only to use it, but they can be able to access it and then also transfer it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Indeed, besides the economic and social profits or benefits that accrue to women as far as land and property ownership is concerned, there's also the the sense of identity that comes with it. So it's just beyond the economic value that you've rightfully highlighted. Our next panelist is Grace Ananda. Grace has been part of a number of efforts around grassroots women mobilization to be able to demand and push for security of tenure, both at the country, but also at the continental level. She previously worked for ActionAid, has also worked for Oxfam, and has played a key role in the development of Kilimanjaro Women's Charter of Demand. Maybe to start us off, Grace, would you mind speaking to us briefly about what this Kilimanjaro Charter of Demand was about, and then equally highlight to us some of the challenges that women have to go through as far as security of tenure is concerned?
Thank you so much, Okesho, for that. So Kilimanjaro Initiative is a continental effort that's been led by the rural women farmers across the country, and we have 22 African countries that women farmers participated in developing the Kilimanjaro Initiative. So this Kilimanjaro Initiative was conceived way back in 2012, but now the development of the Charter of Demand was done Thanks so much, Wakesho. Kilimanjaro Initiative is a continental effort organized by the rural women farmers, supported by a civil society organization across the country and also across the continent. We have partners like Oxfam International, Roots Kenya. We have also International Land Coalition and also ActionAid, who supported the rural women farmers to participate in this continental effort of Women to Kilimanjaro Initiative. The reason why we called it Kilimanjaro Initiative is because the Charter of Demand was developed in 2016 in Kilimanjaro, and we had quite a number of women farmers coming across 22 African countries who gathered in Arusha to develop this Charter of Demand, drawn from the continental framework, like large-scale land-based investment, the Maputo Protocol, to ensure that women own access land, and also they're supported in their different countries, and also working closely with the Traditional Council of Elders. So as we speak right now, we have the Charter of Demand at the AU. It was signed. But now we are still lobbying to ensure that the Charter of Demand on women land rights, it is one of the tools that's going to be used by the member states to advance women land rights in their respective countries. So we are lobbying just to ensure the Charter of Demand is at the AU depository or library. So some of the factors that have made women not access women land in their respective countries, One is the issue of patriarchal society where we come from, where women have no say when it comes to participation and access of land. And by doing that, we've realized that the women or small-scale farmers, they face a lot of injustices, inequality, especially when you have a case that the spouse has died and now the family wants to get back the land. Apart from the customary related issues, we also have lack of knowledge for the rural women farmers. So it's important for us as civil society to ensure that we unpack these policies and to make it to be as simple as possible for the rural women farmers to know what their rights are when it comes to access of land and ownership. Another thing, we've had challenges like the investment, big investments that come into different countries. Here I'm talking about large-scale land-based investment, whereby participation is not done fully, and even if it's done, women are left behind. So there's a lot of sensitization and capacity building that needs to be done, and also a lot of research, so that when we do our advocacy-related work, we look at the research and data that is there to ensure that women access land, and also they can make a decision when it comes to tenant security. So I'll stop at that, and then we'll discuss more, right?
Thank you so much, Grace. Indeed, the challenges as far as women's land rights is concerned are major, as highlighted by Grace. They range from patriarchy, stereotypes, just to mention but a few. So thank you very much, Grace, for highlighting those challenges and for bringing to us what the Kilimanjaro Chapter is about. Indeed, just as the theme is in this particular year, choosing to challenge, we must continue to challenge the stereotypes, even as we move closer to the table and make all the critical decisions as far as land and property is concerned for women. Moving on swiftly, we move back to you, Liz. You highlighted earlier some of the benefits, that accrue to women once they are able to own, control these lands. You mentioned aspects around access to finance. You also mentioned, being able to make certain critical decisions at household level. But is that all for women? What other benefits are associated with women owning land in this country?
Thank you very much. When women own land, apart from making decisions, you will find that what happens is that they now have a voice. Because if you do not have a voice, then your rights will be downtrodden. Land also becomes very pertinent in the sense that land is a scarce resource, in the sense that the land that we have is all that we have. Therefore, there's need to safeguard that land, and that also women have their share when that land is concerned. When you have land, you can transfer it, you can develop it. You basically have a say in your own. In matters that affect you. So for me, I look at land as this resource that we must all have a very, very sober conversations about, because we have seen, if you look at our country, especially at the grassroots, whenever there are wars, there are fights, the bottom line will always be something that relates to land. If you look at issues around gender-based violence, if we could sort out the land issue, then I believe that in one way or another, domestic violence will go down. Thank you.
Very interesting that you highlight issues around domestic violence, because there has been a narrative that when women own land, that there's chances for increased gender and sexual-based violence at household level. What are your thoughts around that?
Okay, thank you. Well, I would begin by saying that a stereotype is constructed by society, and therefore there's need, as we have this conversation, to deconstruct some of these stereotypes. If you have a genuine conversation where women, because there's a report that was done by FIDA in 2009, and it showed that women, especially small-scale hold farmers, they provide 70% of the labor. But when it comes to titling, these women only hold 1%. So that is a stereotype that we must begin deconstructing today as we go along, so that women can get their fair share where land is concerned.
Asante sana, Liz. I think I couldn't say it better than you have said, that indeed these are social constructions, and our work today must be to deconstruct those social constructions. Just to remind us that we are live on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @FIDA_Kenya, and on YouTube is FIDA Kenya. We appreciate you, Sarah Njoki. We notice you've joined us. Good morning to you, Sitati, and I hope you can hear us pretty well. Please feel free to share your questions, your comments, your concerns, and my able panel will be responding to all your questions. Feel free to post them on the 2 social sites that I have mentioned. That's at FIDA Kenya on Twitter and at FIDA Kenya still on YouTube. Moving on swiftly to you, Grace. You know, you said something that at the continental level, there's been quite some good progress. We have a number of commitments. In 2009, I think our heads of states and governments in the continent did adopt the Declaration on Land Challenges and Issues in Africa. And one of the critical commitments was to be able to ensure that women's land rights are secured. And the African Union also went ahead to launch a campaign about ensuring that at least 25% of land is titled for women by 2025. We are almost there. We're in 2021. And in 4 years, we'll be coming back to reflect on how much we have done. But as you rightfully said, that there's still a gap between the African Union commitments and what is happening at the country. And so even though we have progressive frameworks at the continental level, we still do not see the same reflected at the country level. What's happening? What must we do to be able to bridge this divide between the continental progressive commitments and what's happening at the country? And of course, ultimately ensure that women's land rights are secured in this country.
Thanks so much, Wakesho. I totally agree with you that member states committed that by 2025, we'll have at least 30% of land is documented under women. And I would want to say there's a lot of progress that has been made in different countries. One of them being Rwanda, where we have good gender representation in all processes in Rwanda, also including land. And one of the key things that countries need to commit to is to ensure that policies that are there, they're implemented at the country level, okay? And that's why we have the Kilimanjaro Charter of Demand that we are lobbying with the AU to ensure that the member states, they adopt it in their countries and also use it as a tool to ensure that there's gender equality and also women are able to access land. Another thing that should be done at the country level, countries should make sure that the international laws are well implemented, not only documented in countries, but fully implemented so that it guarantees women access to land. There's also a need for the women's rights movements and also human rights movement to work closely with the governments, because when we come together, we are able to achieve much to ensure that access of land and property for women is achieved at all levels, from the grassroots, the national level. And one most important thing, now that we have a lot of investment that is happening in Africa, there's need to ensure that there's full participation, consent, when it comes to acquisition of land for multinational companies. As much as we have these policies and countries have committed to, Kenya being one of them, there's need for close monitoring of this framework, how they're being implemented by respective countries. Also, for the civil society to work closely with the policymakers to ensure that these processes are done in a very correct and sustainable way. So the issue of full implementation is still a big problem, and we need to put more effort on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's saddening that we still go back to the conversation around implementation. And as you've rightfully highlighted, countries like Rwanda have made quite some good progress. But coming back to the country, we have the National Titling Program. And as you know, post-2016, once we passed the Community Land Act, we are now moving to registering community or indigenous land rights. 2 years ago, I think a report by Kenya Land Alliance, if I'm not wrong, did highlight some glaring discrepancies about the National Titling Program. You know, ideally, less than 10% of this land is titled under women. Yet we still take pride of the fact that we have a progressive constitution, we have progressive land-related laws. So what's the problem? What's happening that we still, you know, come back to the glaring discrepancies as far as, you know, ownership of land for women is concerned in this country? Yet we have committed to these progressive continental frameworks.
Actually, as I'd said earlier, there is a big gap. That's what I would say when it comes to implementation of this framework. And I'm happy to hear that Kenya is really actually putting more effort to ensure that there is land documentation, digitalization that is happening here in Kenya. However, as much as the government is doing that, we as civil society and non-state actors, we need to work closely with them, and we need also to monitor progress. Because it's shocking that from the report by Kenya Land Alliance, it's so shocking that most of the lands here, the titling, it's big issue. So we as the civil society, we need to work closely with the government in whichever manner, from implementation, monitoring at all levels, to ensure that this gap that is there is closed to realize women land rights, not only in Africa but also in Kenya, and also working with the indigenous community and also the traditional leaders to ensure that these processes run smoothly. Thank you.
Asante sana, Grace. Liz, to you now. FIDA has been a pace setter in the conversation about security of tenure for women in this country, and of course women rights broadly. I think about 2-3 years ago, FIDA was in court to challenge aspects of contribution. So when as women we are told that we must show our contribution, yet our contribution can be both monetary and non-monetary. And FIDA was in court to be able to challenge and challenge this provision, but also push for upholding of the constitutional provision that indeed parties in marriage are equal at the point of marriage, during marriage, and upon dissolution of marriage. I know that's not the only effort that FIDA has spearheaded, but there's been a couple of other incredible efforts, you know, the Kericho case, among others. Could you please highlight to us some of the cases that FIDA has handled as far as, you know, advancing the rights that women have as far as land and property is concerned?
Thank you, Eileen, for that question. It is true, FIDA remains to be a critical player in the women's movement and also in the land space. FIDA did go to court to challenge, that was Section 6 of the Matrimonial Act, which at the time stated that women needed to show contribution. The reason FIDA went to court to challenge this clause is because they felt it contravened sections of the Constitution that said that you know, parties within a marriage have an equal right to property. So they felt the need to actually challenge this petition, although the judgment was later delivered, and to the contrary, it was not in our favor. But I believe that case did set precedent, and as we speak now, it is a requirement that parties upon dissolution of a marriage, parties have to show contribution, whether that is monetary or non-monetary. Another reason that made FIDA to go to court is because it felt that how do we access land? We access land either through buying, but mostly for women, it is through marriage. So they felt that upon the dissolution of a marriage, then this particular provision would leave women more disadvantaged. Thank you.
Very interesting case indeed. So are you telling us that going forward that we need to be able to document some of our expenses that contribute to property acquisition in marriage? Or how do you envision this going forward? What should women like myself do to ensure that our rights are protected within the institution of marriage?
Thank you again. Well, there's a tendency to only think that contribution equals monetary. When a woman toils so hard and she prepares that man to be able to go to work, that is contribution. And then women need to be trained more to be aware of their rights, because when you know, you do better. So I believe that when women know their rights, they will be able to agitate and do better. And as FIDA, when we empower women, that does not mean we are disempowering men. No, we are just trying to bring into place the power balance that needs to be there. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz, for that reminder that indeed contribution goes beyond monetary contribution. It's not just about the money that I put in to acquire this property. It's also the non-monetary contribution in terms of childcare, in terms of companionship, and many other non-financial contributions at the family level. At this particular point, I want to welcome our consultant who led the development of this particular report on the status of women's land rights in the country, reflecting on the African Union's commitments as far as land and property ownership is concerned. Our consultant is Julia Odhiambo. And she did analyze the 4 instruments that I mentioned earlier. That's the framework and guidelines of on land policy in Africa, the guiding principles on large-scale land-based investments, the Maputo Protocol, and the voluntary guidelines. Julia, I don't know if you can hear me. The floor is yours. As Julia is getting ready, Julia is getting ready. Go ahead, Julia.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Julia Odhiambo. I'm not able to be physically with you today, but I will deliver my remarks via Zoom. So first of all, I'd like to thank FIDA Kenya and the partners for convening this session. It's a very important and very timely discussion, and I thank you very much for providing the platform in which women are able to engage on issues regarding land rights. So working in collaboration with the Federation of Women Lawyers in Kenya and the Oxfam Pan-Africa project, we commissioned a study one year ago, titled Women, Land Rights for Inclusive Development and Growth in Africa. This report detailed the findings. Sorry, my voice is echoing. I think there's an issue with whoever is controlling the controls. Kindly look into that, but I'll continue. So this report detailed the findings of the status of women and land rights in Kenya, which was premised on the 4 frameworks of the African Union. And as elaborated in the beginning, these 4 frameworks were 1, the framework and guidelines on land policy in Africa; 2, the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests in the context of national food security; 3, the guiding principles on large-scale land-based investments; and 4, the Maputo Protocol, which is otherwise referred to as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa. Having conducted this analysis and evaluation, our conclusion from this research was that although steps have been taken to advance the status of women and land rights in Kenya, a more concerted effort must be employed to achieve 1, equality, but 2, inclusivity, to ensure that the issues of women and land rights in Kenya are well addressed. And I believe these sentiments have been echoed by the panelists that went before me. In the course of conducting this research, we engaged governmental actors and non-governmental actors. For more details of the people engaged, kindly have a look at the report to see the various entities we were able to speak to. Having engaged these actors, we must say the insights shared and the conversations had were very insightful. However, we were also able to establish that there are indeed a myriad of obstacles to achieving women and land rights, and various of them have been touched upon by the previous panelists. This include, number one, patriarchy; number two, the inferior status granted to women; number three, the information and knowledge gap around women and land rights, not only in Kenya, but women and land rights in Africa as a whole; number four, there was a scarcity at the time we were doing our research on the discourse around issues on women and land rights. Number five, there is a limited access to justice, which makes it very hard to gain or find recourse for people whose rights as pertains to land rights is concerned. Number six, there are gaps in the documentation and reporting of information on women and land rights. And number seven, there are systematic challenges around processes that pertain to the insurance. I will not go in depth into this, as these are detailed in the report, and you can further engage with that once you look at the report. And while it's very important to talk about problems and talk about issues, it's very important to devise practical methods in which state and other actors can meet their obligations as regards the status of women and land rights. Having engaged the various actors, both governmental, state, and non-state actors, a series of recommendations were offered in which steps were given to describe how women and land rights can be best realized and implemented in the Kenyan context, which can be translated to Africa as a whole. These recommendations were one, termed in, or rather given across various sections. We termed the recommendations as number one, legal-based approaches; number two, data and information-based approaches; number three, institutional and structural-based approaches; number four, stakeholder-based approaches; and number five, emerging issues. And I will quickly touch upon them so you can gain an understanding, and the rest of them are well enumerated in the report. So for legal-based approaches, number one, it was identified that indeed Kenya has sufficient laws in place to advocate and to realize women and land rights. However, we must take steps, the relevant actors must take steps to build on the current legal framework. A particular focus was brought on the Matrimonial Property Act. Of all the respondents that were engaged in this conversation and in this research, all of them brought a particular focus on the Matrimonial Property Act. And if you read the report, you'll gain a further understanding of this. Number two, on legal-based approaches, a recommendation was strongly given to build on the culture of litigation. All the respondents believed that litigation can help solve women and land rights cases at an individual level. Litigation can also be used to educate, create awareness, but to also institute justice for those whose rights have been violated. Still on legal-based approaches, a recommendation was given for the use of alternative dispute resolution. Having looked at what has been done on the ground so far, it was understood that decisions have been arrived at by alternative dispute resolution. However, in order for these decisions to be well known and to be well respected, we must seek as the relevant actors to create awareness of legal measures away from the conventional court system by giving strength and promoting the use of alternative dispute resolution, particularly as concerns the rights of Indigenous women and women in rural areas. I'll move on to data and information-based approaches. All respondents believed that all actions being taken on women and land rights must be complemented by existing information. The conclusion was made that information is the yardstick through which progress can be made to chart ways forward. We cannot be talking about women and land rights if we don't know where we are coming from, if we don't have data, if we don't have articles, if we don't have any existing documentation to guide our efforts going forward. Therefore, any effort we take must be complemented by existing information. Number 2, it was agreed and the recommendation given that localizing of this data and information is indeed very crucial. It must be channeled from a centrally generated system, and this same information must be localized. This will allow further research and enable all actors, even those that don't have access to central systems, to be able to maneuver and access this information. Number 3, on data and information, the recommendation was given for the digitization of records. This would enhance accessibility of data and information, thereby incentivizing efforts for people, or rather all actors, to continue reporting on women and land rights. Number 3, on institutional and structural based approaches, recommendations were given to, first of all, train staff, particularly technical staff and personnel, on the substantive and procedural elements around the work and discourse on women and land rights. Anyone that works in the area of women and land rights ought to have a proper understanding of this, what it means, and how it practically translates on the ground. Number 2, a second recommendation that was given was to have strategic plans around women and land rights. Having strategic plans at an organizational level, given the NGOs that advocate for women and land rights, but also governmental actors, would ensure that women and attention it deserves. These are just the 2 top recommendations given from this segment. For more of them, you can have a look at the report. In the 4th section, based on outreach-based interventions, 3 main recommendations were given. The first was to engage the public in campaigns around women and land rights. Yes, indeed, people know the situation is not equal as far as women have access and ownership to land. While it is public knowledge, that same knowledge must be translated and used to engage the public around advocacy efforts on women and land rights. Number 2, a recommendation was made to engage men in this conversation. And this goes back to the first point. Indeed, men, our fellow men, know that the situation is not equal, but knowledge alone is not enough. They too must be involved in the conversation around advocating for equality and inclusivity of women in the issues of land. Number 3, the recommendation made was we must implement women and land rights activities across all areas of our work using an intersectional approach. So, for example, women and land rights can be spoken of when we talk about, it is a governance issue, but it can be spoken about on issues such as, when we talk about domestic violence, like Elizabeth mentioned, women and land rights is not a standalone issue. It affects all areas of women's lives when it comes to their economic empowerment, when it comes to issues of their health, sexual and reproductive health, that would come in through domestic violence. Therefore, the recommendation was given to have women and land rights included across various issues that affect women and not address it as a standalone item. Number 4, on stakeholder-based information, the 4 main recommendations given were 1, to create regional networks that would address the issues of women and land rights. Number 2, to strategically work in partnerships when we seek to advocate for women and land rights in Kenya and in Africa. Number 3, to have intergenerational dialogues on women and land rights. Women that were fighting for land 50 years ago would be able to offer insightful information to women today who are fighting for land. The dynamics might be different, but the issues are the same. Therefore, it's very important to have this intergenerational dialogues. And number 4, to directly engage women. We can be here talking as panels, but if we don't go out to the grassroots level to engage these women, our efforts, all these advocacy efforts would be futile. Therefore, the recommendation was made that all efforts on advocacy around women and land rights must directly engage these women. And then lastly, on recommendations regarding emerging issues, the top 3 recommendations given were, number 1, to ensure the financing of climate change activities when we talk about women and land rights. We know climate change is a very important issue we are addressing now, and women often bear the brunt when climate change issues come to the fore. So a recommendation was made to engage women, first of all, as the ones that suffer the violations, but to also engage them in light of the double marginalization they face when it comes to climate change issues. Number 2, it was also recommended that we ought to pursue women's economic empowerment. This would give them a stronger voice when they were advocating, or rather talking about their women and land rights. Having had a voice, like Liz mentioned, or having a voice in your own right gives you power as you seek to advocate for your own issues, which include land. And then lastly, the last recommendation that was made was to make use of non-conventional adjudication measures. An example was given, for example, of how the Council of Elders at a local level can be used as an avenue for redress. This, especially as pertains to the land rights of Indigenous women. Yes, it's important to talk about advocacy in terms of litigation, going to court, or advocacy on social media by creating awareness, but it's also important to embed non-conventional adjudication steps or non-conventional adjudication measures around all efforts that seek to advocate for women and land rights. So all of this is just a snapshot of what has been elaborated in the report. I urge you all to read the report and engage with it further to understand the research that was undertaken, but to also better understand some of the issues that are being raised by our panelists today. Thank you.
And print to us a real picture about the status of women land rights in the country. About the status of women land rights in the country. Before I let you go, I know you'd have to excuse yourself at some point, but just to maybe pose a question to you. You have highlighted rightfully some of the recommendations as a result of this work that you did. One of them, to me, is nothing new, but quite interesting, because you highlight that some of the obstacles to women's access and ownership of land is around limited access to justice. But within some of your recommendations, you also point out that there's need to sort of nurture the culture of litigation. So how do we nurture this culture of litigation, yet access to justice is fairly elusive? It's not affordable to most women. It takes longer in terms of time. So how then do we nurture this culture of litigation amidst the existing challenges as far as access to justice is concerned? Julia? As far as access to justice is concerned, Julia? As far as access to justice is concerned, Julia?
All right, moderator. I hope you can hear me again. There's an echo. So I'd ask the people controlling the controls to look into this. But just to answer your question, I feel like you've already given the answers to the question you're posing. Indeed, litigation should be embraced, but the reason litigation is not embraced by many is because, number one, it's a very lengthy process. People would rather opt for an easier way out, for a less expensive process, for a shorter process, but also for a process in which they have transparency. So while litigation is between sound control, my apologies. The sound is not good.
Just give us a minute, Julie. 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 Apologies about that embrace, but it comes with share of challenges. Julie, do we still have you online?
Yes, I am still online, and I'll proceed to carry on with my initial sentiments. Like I started off by saying, indeed, you pose a question, but indeed in your question you give certain answers that indeed can be embraced to make a case for litigation in the case of women and land rights. I feel like litigation is a very important method that can be used to advocate for women and land rights. However, it has not been embraced because of how lengthy the process can be, but also how inaccessible the process can be. So going forward, if this is an effort or a method that must be used, I believe that one, it must be more accessible. Hello, am I still there?
What caught your attention? What was new? What was strange?
Well, for me, I'd say I find it strange that to date women still have a challenge accessing to justice. And here, this is where institutions like FIDA Kenya come in. FIDA Kenya does offer free legal services to the disadvantaged women in society, and generally in not only in matters land, but in issues that would touch on women. Our services are free, and we continue to advance women's rights by offering our our legal services for free. Another thing that FIDA Kenya does very well, FIDA Kenya, well, as she said, there's need to pursue justice through litigation. FIDA Kenya works a lot with community-based organizations at the grassroots, since the demand for our services is quite high. And through the CBO network, that is how cases are able to be referred to us as an organization. FIDA Kenya over time has also carved its a niche for itself as a lead women's rights organization when it comes to legal matters. It has a robust pro bono lawyer service scheme that touches in each and every corner of this country. My appeal is to any woman: if you feel disadvantaged, disenfranchised, kindly feel free to reach to us. FIDA Kenya does have a toll-free number that we will be sharing at the end of this launch to be able to keep the wheels of justice moving. However slow, we need not give up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that brief. And I can see the report is so rich. What I liked about the recommendation is the nexus of climate change and land, because whatever happens on land affects the climate. And it's important for women to be at the center of climate change mitigation and adaptation. And that can only be done successfully if they are given access, control, and ownership of land. And something else that also caught my attention is the data information approach, which is very key when it comes to any processes that needs policy implementation and also formation of new policies. So it would be important for civil society and state actors and also FIDA to strengthen or to continue working closely with the grassroots women to be at the center of collection of data themselves. Then they'll be able to own the process. So I know FIDA has been doing this, but if they can continue doing this to ensure that women are at the center when it comes to evidence-based research approaches at all levels. The final thing that Julia has also said, and which I also mentioned, is the commitment on how government should ensure the implementation is done, okay, fully, not partially, or just not government doing it because now there's a campaign coming, election is now they want to register land and all that. So that full commitment by the government is very key, and also working collaboratively with the civil society. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Grace. You rightfully highlight that indeed women are managers of land and natural resources. And so if they are given full ownership, then they are in a better position to be able to make critical decisions as far as climate adaptation is concerned, resilience, and mitigation. And so indeed, the nexus of women's land rights and climate is a reality. But just to pose back a question to you, Julia raised an interesting perspective that even as we focus on gender justice and women's rights as far as land and property ownership is concerned, that we must also focus on the intergenerational aspect. And so, you know, women are not necessarily a homogeneous group. You know, what affects young women as far as access and ownership of land is concerned is far different to that which affects maybe, you know, the elderly women. What are your thoughts about how then do we tailor interventions to be able to be more responsive to the different classes and categories of women in this country?
Thanks so much, Akesho. Actually, when I mentioned earlier, I said the process of ownership of land for women, it should be inclusive. Mm-hmm. It should look at the elderly, it should look at the traditional leaders. It should also look at the youth, because we've realized that there's a lot of unemployment for the youths, not only in Kenya, but also in the continent. So if youth are also in the part of the process when it comes to tenure security, working closely with the rural women farmers or women themselves, it will mean that we'll have increased productivity, we'll have increased employment, and that one will increase, what is it called? It will increase the level of livelihood and participation, ownership, okay, for all these processes. So the inclusivity at all levels is very key. I also remember Julia mentioned that issues to do with tenure security for women, it should be implemented at all, it should be talked about at all levels, not only when it comes to land, but also climate change, environment, human rights issues, okay? When it comes to laws and all other processes, it should also be discussed at that level, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to knowledge, people being empowered, and also women being empowered. Yeah, thank you.
Asante sana, Grace. We are still live on our Twitter at FIDA Kenya, on YouTube, FIDA Kenya. And I see you, Janet, Kay, Caroline Mutai, Claire Chega, thanks for staying tuned. I see your questions too, and I will be posing them to our panel shortly. Please stay with us, because after we conclude our panel, we'll be moving to launching the report on the status of women land rights in this country. And we'll also be giving you guidelines or guidance on where to access this report shortly. So please stay tuned. Caroline Mutai, no, this is Janet, sorry. Janet K, you ask, how can we increase uptake by women on land rights? How do we increase the uptake? So ideally, it's the land rights uptake for women in this country. Liz, do you want to pick that?
Yes, I will. I would say I'd encourage women to come out. For a very long time, women have been violated. And when you're violated the first time, you rebuke it. The second time, you condone it. The third time, it becomes the norm. That need not be the norm. Women need to speak up whenever their rights are violated. As I speak to you, FIDA Kenya is part of the access to the Alternative Justice Committee. That is a committee that, as Julie earlier alluded, will also help us as we do the alternative justice system. It will help us bring the cost of litigation down. So for me, it is to appeal to the women to attend community sensitization forums whenever they are organized. FIDA does conduct quite a bit of sensitization forums in this country, so that we are able to see, because you see, when we sit on our problems, what is not a problem shared is a problem half solved, and what is not known and documented, then you cannot even begin to make a case or litigate or on such matters. Mine is to appeal to the women of Kenya. FIDA has come a long way. FIDA is willing to continue partnering with you so that you're able to not only access but also secure your rights. My second appeal would be, as we speak about women land rights, we are not seeking to disenfranchise or disempower men. We also need men who are women land rights champions to be able to come on board and to enrich this conversation, because as we know it in this country, men are the power wielders. We're just trying to have a power-to-power conversation, not to disempower any gender at the expense of the other. Thank you.
Asante sana, Liz. Still on you. Child Space Organization says, as FIDA Kenya partners, we've been working with women from grassroots level, and the land ownership has been a thorn in the flesh. How can we start engaging more practically?
Okay, thank you for that, Child Space. And what I would say, for us to be able to engage practically, we sit in panels, we sit in boards, and make some of these legislations and policy that touch on the grassroots women. My appeal is to those of us in the civil society to be able to go down to the grassroots and to be able to interact, because that is where the issues are rife, and that is where we will be able to get materials that we can be able to document and advance our advocacy cause. Thank you.
Asante sana. I know we are racing with time, and I want us to have adequate time as we launch the report so that you get guidance on where to access this report. It highlights the glaring discrepancies between African Union commitments and our national commitments as a country. But just to conclude, Julia also mentioned that some of these commitments that are made by our heads of states and governments at the AU level rarely translate to national either legislations or policy frameworks. And so if you ask many people in the country, how many know some of the contents of the AU declarations on land issues and challenges in Africa, many people would not be in a good position to tell you what exactly is contained. Yet these are commitments that our heads of state make at the African Union Heads of State Summit. And so Julia highlights that it's important for us to figure out how best to ensure that these commitments are localized, they are brought down, and people get to know them so that they are then in a better position to be able to hold our duty bearers to account. What do you think going forward, the different actors, because one of the recommendations from Julia is around stakeholders approach. What do you think these stakeholders, who are they, and what do you think they must start to do in efforts to ensure that these commitments at the African Union level are brought down to the national space?
Thanks, Kesho. I want to say that the main reason why governments must act to ensure that women land rights are enforced in different countries is because the Agenda 2063 of the African Union discusses land governance broadly, including Goal 13, that talks of peace and security, and also 17 on full gender equality in all spheres. Some of the actors that need to work collaboratively with the grassroots women, one, the civil society that advocating for human rights and also women's rights. In Kenya, we have Kenya Parliamentarian Caucus on human rights. We also have the Kenya Women's Caucus at the parliament. We also have grassroots organizations that need to be to work closely with now FIDA and also other movements that advocate for gender security for women. It would also be important to strengthen women's rights within the country and to connect with continental efforts like the Kilimanjaro Initiative, which is Kilimanjaro Initiative that highlighted or developed a chart of demand based on the legal frameworks that are there in the continent, and also international framework that promote gender equality and also women land rights. Julia has also mentioned about Maputo Protocol. We have large-scale land-based investment, and also Beijing Platform for Action. It's very important for this grassroots organization to be empowered, or the civil society working with the grassroots women, to have these policies in a simpler way, to have a simplified version of it. And here I'm talking about the advocacy approaches that civil society can use in form of animations, in a simpler language. You remember Julia put more emphasis on that. And then working on building capacity of rural women organization at local level, facilitating forums, and also connecting them to continental spaces. I'm happy that FIDA Kenya has been supporting grassroots women also to participate in the annual AU pre-consultative meeting, and also the GMAC meeting that always happens every year, that is also sits in the AU space, AU Department of Gender. It's also important for the national and regional initiative to address socioeconomic issues related to women, equal access and control of land through advocacy, awareness, and also creating programs that is all inclusive, ensuring that also youth are part of the process and also women are also part of the process. So all these efforts should be inclusive, looking at the governments, looking at the civil society, the grassroots women themselves, and also the Council of Elders, because most of the land in Africa, the custodians are the elderly, okay? So they need to be in this process. Thank you.
Asante, Grace. We're almost coming to the end of our panel, but even as we do so, I would read the last comment from Caroline Mutai. It's not really a question, but more of a comment. And Caroline, you say, when women develop a property that may have been purchased prior to marriage, her contribution will still be considered as far as, any contribution, so whether it's a fence or putting up a structure or any other development. You also say that any property that is acquired after the marriage, even though it may bear the husband's name solely, it deems to be family property. I think that's an accurate presentation of the Matrimonial and Property Act. Thank you so much, Caroline. We come now to the conclusion of our panel, but even as we do so, I will give my panelists a minute each to make their final remarks. Please stay tuned, because then we move to launching the Status of Women Land Rights report by the Deputy Executive Director of FIDA Kenya, Ms. Wanjiru Kamanda. I now move back to my panel for a last comment to all those that have been following through our conversation. I'll start with you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Wakesho. And my two last recommendation is that commitment entered by African countries to implement the AU Declaration on Land Policy and framework on guidelines should be made practical in different countries by member states, and also to involve the rural women farmers and also the councils of elders. And lastly, government should establish gender-responsive land administration system that enhance women participation at all levels, mainstreaming gender in land administration system. Thank you so much.
Asante sana, Grace. Liz, your final comments?
Okay, thank you so much, Aileen. My final comment would be to civil society actors to be able to come together so that we can continue pushing this conversation on women land rights. And to the general public, land need not be an issue that intimidates or scares anyone. We belong to society. We all belong to a family. We all belong to a church somewhere. This is a conversation that we need to simplify so that we can have it within our very local networks. This can be barazas. This can be in religious gatherings, family gatherings, so that we are able to maintain and gain momentum on issues of women land rights. I would also like to say that FIDA Kenya continues to remain committed. We have simplified versions of the various laws that are available, so feel free to interact with us through our various platforms and also through our paralegal scheme. A paralegal is not necessarily a lawyer, but this is a community champion who understands and has been trained, which is one of the things that FIDA Kenya does, to be able to understand and interact comfortably with issues of law so that they are able to assist our community. And then also men who are women land rights champions, keep going. You need not shy away. We are in this together. Thank you.
A huge thank you to my panelists, Grace Ananda, Elizabeth Gishowi, Julia Ojiambo, who joined us virtually. Indeed, the fight for security of tenure for women is not purely a women issue. It's a national concern. And it's a conversation that has started and has to continue throughout until we have a fair representation in terms of the numbers that we are seeing on women's ownership of land and land-based resources. That said, I want to thank you all, my viewers, for tuning in and staying connected. Please continue to share your questions and comments. The team at FIDA will be getting back to you for the questions that we have been unable to answer during this live session. We would also be sharing the free toll number for FIDA in case you have particular questions, comments that you want responded to by the FIDA team. Thank you so much to my panel. Now, moving to the last session of this discussion, we are now moving to launching the status report on women's land rights. As I highlighted before, this is a report that FIDA Kenya did in partnership with Oxfam Africa program. And the report highlights 4 critical instruments. That is the framework and guidelines on national land, policy, the guiding principles on large-scale land-based investments, the Maputo Protocol, and lastly, the voluntary guidelines. With those comments, I now welcome the FIDA Deputy Director to move to the place where we'll be launching the report. Ms. Wanjiru, please share with us just brief highlight. Yes, I think you'd move to launching the report. Maybe you would want to make a few remarks before you do so. And maybe the FIDA team would also join the Deputy Executive Director as they launch the report.
Sure, just to pass our appreciation to everyone who joined us and for making the discussion so lively as much as they were joining us virtually. And just to reinstate FIDA's commitment to the promotion and protection of women's rights across the board. And relevant to the discussion today, women's land rights. And our focus is also on the rights of women in extractive industries. We've been doing a lot of work across the country, including in Kwale County over the same. So just to mention that we are very grateful. And FIDA, as my colleague mentioned, we are very open. We continue to offer free legal and psychosocial support as part of ensuring that women access justice. So if any of the ones watching us today have an issue, kindly feel free to reach us through the toll-free number that shall be shared. Thank you.
The FIDA team, please join the Deputy Executive Director as she launches the report. Please also share with us where we would get this report, if it's going to be uploaded on the website.
Sure, yes. The report shall be available at on our website. We'll be sharing the same on our website. And we'll also share a link to our social media sites. Hard copies will be available through our partners and also from program activity. So when you have a program activity, we'll be able to share hard copies.
Asante. We now move to unveil the status of women land rights in Kenya report. The report is being launched by the Deputy Executive Director of FIDA Kenya. She rightfully mentioned that you can get exciting. Please feel free to check on FIDA's website on the availability of this report. Feel free to also engage with the findings and the conclusions of this particular exciting report. Thank you so much. We wish you a great day.